Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kim Schmidt, Executive Editor of Farm Equipment Magazine. Welcome to our latest webinar in conjunction with the North American Equipment Dealers Association. Today's presenters are Eric Wareham, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs with NAIDA, and Jennifer Luce, Vice President of Member Engagement for NAIDA. They're going to be reviewing a newly launched training initiative and advocacy campaign with manufacturers called Repair Done Right to change the narrative on right to repair. Before they get started with the presentation, just a couple of housekeeping items. On your screen, there's a control panel with a Q&A icon. You can submit questions here at any time during the presentation, and then time permitting, we'll try to answer as many of those questions as possible. And then just a reminder, as always, we are recording today's webinar. In the event you want to share it with anyone else or come back and watch it later, it'll be available for you. So with that, we're ready to get started. Thanks again for joining us, and you can take it away, Eric.
Well, thanks, Kim. Appreciate everybody coming and joining us today for Repair Done Right, changing the narrative on right to repair. I have Jennifer Luce with me, our VP of Member Engagement for NAIDA, and many of you in the industry know her. She was very instrumental in putting this together and making it a reality. So I thought it would be appropriate for her to join me and add her insights on this as well. So as an overview, we're going to walk through sort of the right to repair update, a look back, where we are now, and jump into what is Repair Done Right, talk about the survey, the training components, the marketing materials, and then the advocacy piece for that. And we'll also talk about how you can sign up for it. So to start off, I thought it was good to kind of take an overview, a broad overview of right to repair legislation from 2018 to 2021, so we can get an idea of the growth and the changes in this issue and bring us up to current status. So in 2018, it had already kind of been and I could go all the way back to probably 2015 when it began. But in 2018 is when it started to kind of take off, get introduced in a couple states. It's when we started to see template legislation with certain provisions and elements of a bill, and also breaking out the difference between just a generic broad-based household consumer electronics into some specific agriculture type issues. And so we started to see, of course, you would expect in the Midwest, a big breakout of this as it started to pick up steam. But I think we did a really good job of fighting it back and getting our points across to legislators who, in the following year in 2019, failed to introduce in a lot of those key Midwest states, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, even Nebraska, where it's now seems perpetually to be reintroduced. And we thought, okay, we're beating it back. It's getting introduced in other new places like Oregon, North Dakota, South Dakota, and it started to move around the country and once again appeared back up into some places in 2020 that we thought we'd had it defeated. And then some new states as well. You started to see the South and the Northeast really start to pick up. And then by 2021, you kind of had a resurgence of right to repair on the Eastern seaboard, the Western, and back in the Midwest. And you can attribute that to a lot of different things, but I think there's certain legislators that picked up on it at first, not knowing what it was, and we did a good job of sort of pouncing on the issue with advocacy, the manufacturers, dealer associations, and coalitions, raising flags, and kind of maybe some legislators scared them off from continuing to run the bill. But then we had some legislators come back with it who seemed to be a bit of a dog with a bone and used right to repair as an issue that they saw could maybe propel them, up in the ranks politically. It was a good issue to bring attention to them. And I think that was certainly the case in several states. It was also the issue that we saw some other groups jump into this. So around 2020 to 2021, we started to get outside groups like the Public Interest Research Group, PIRG, repair.org, and some others that, and even some groups that saw it as a wedge issue, maybe to try to divide that rural America as Democrats sought to regain some folks in there. So you have, the Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders pushing to get it accepted as part of the Democratic National Party platform. And that brought a resurgence as well. And so that brought us to 2022, where it seemed to kind of explode, I guess. Compared to the previous year that was introduced in more states, we had 28 introduced right to repair legislation in 2022. One of the key differences was that proponents had paid lobbyists. So they started to get a little bit more professional and have some money behind them. Now, where that money comes from and what are the motivations for these outside groups to have rise to the level of paid lobbyists, that's an interesting question. Because as I always say to PIRG and some others, there's already a group that represents farmers as a group. It's called Farm Bureau. And so I'm not sure where you guys fit into the picture, because most of them have no experience in agriculture. And that does come through and shines through in legislative hearings pretty often. But nonetheless, that was a concern that with paid lobbyists, there was going to be even more difficult to fight this. And I don't think that it necessarily changed the dynamic, because again, going back to why does this legislation move around and kind of shift through the states? I think that in the states where there is a legislator that has really clung on to it and becomes the driving force behind it, those are the states that are most difficult, because it's driven by them. And I think the outside groups maybe don't have as much sway, but they certainly show up and keep it going. And just as an update for this past year, we had a lot of late sessions, but still no off-road equipment bills passed. There were several ag-specific bills introduced, more than we've seen in previous years, that sort of parsed out the household consumer electronics and just focused on off-road farm and construction equipment, and sometimes even just farm equipment. As many of you know, New York did adopt the first right to repair legislation. And I say the legislature adopted it because it has yet to, as of right now. The governor has not signed that into law or vetoed it, as far as I know. And farm equipment was notoriously exempted from that bill. And that was a big achievement for our industry. And I think it also garnered I certainly received a lot of media requests asking why farm equipment was not included in the bill. And, we got to share the sort of somewhat obvious distinctions between a iPhone and a $1 million combine or $500,000 tractor, and some of the safety and emissions elements that farm equipment brings up that iPhones do not. And so we also had a number of interim study hearings. And at first, I was opposed to the idea of having anything about right to repair. I think the cat's out of the bag in many of these places where it's been brought up enough times. And what I've found is that, and I think there's some people on this call that probably would echo the same sentiment, is that in state legislative hearings, you're under the gun. Everybody sort of knows that the cameras are on and people are watching and it's on the record. So you get a little bit of performance art from legislators. There's always earnest questions, but I think the hardest part is that you have a bunch of people that want to testify and everybody gets, 2 to 5 minutes. This is a very complex issue that requires peeling back the layers of the onion, so to speak, to get at what is really going on and what actually is the role of the legislature getting involved. And that's really difficult to do under that pressure cooker of a legislative hearing. These interim study hearings, as it turns out, are, in my opinion, a better venue for testifying. We've had dealers be able to actually get up and have 15, 30 minutes to talk about their business and what they do to help support customers. And you really start to see the light shine through and sort of dawn on committee members' heads about what's actually going on here. And you get around sort of the quick, one-liners and that kind of thing, and get into the meat of it and actually sort of start to discover everything that dealers do to support customer repair and everything manufacturers do to support it, and that there really isn't this sort of malicious intent to prevent repair. And so I think that that's been, and we just had one in North Carolina this week. It was the third one in North Carolina, in fact. And I think the more the better, because like I said, we really have a better opportunity to share our story instead of being defined by other groups. And that's a big part of this campaign that we'll get to talk about in a second. To round this out on the right to repair update, at the federal level, there's 2 Senate bills that have been introduced on right to repair in general. The ag specific one is Senator Tester from the great state of Montana, and it is the only ag specific bill. He introduced this back in February, and it was referred to the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and has not received a hearing, hasn't been pushed. I think that it's fair to say that Senator Tester introduced this on behalf of a couple of entities in the state of Montana. The National Farmers Union was pushing for it, and so it was that kind of template language was adopted and introduced, but hasn't gone anywhere. There's also Senate 3830. That's a broad-based bill, so it's all digital electronic devices. What's interesting about that, and also of concern, is that it has pretty broad appeal. So you have Cynthia Lummis, who's a Republican from Wyoming, probably one of the more conservative members of the Senate. And you also have Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, who's probably one of the most progressive members of the Senate, both co-sponsoring that legislation. So that's really interesting in and of itself. It doesn't happen very frequently these days. House version, 2 bills, 6566, that's the broad-based. Medical devices are already exempt from that. And then you have 6570, which is motor vehicles. Interesting because as we go through a lot of hearings, we hear a lot about the memorandum of understanding, the MOU for the automotive industry, and that this has all been resolved for automotive, yet there's a federal bill that seeks to change all of that. Of concern to the agriculture industry is the co-sponsorship. G.T. Thompson, Republican from Pennsylvania, signed on to that bill as a co-sponsor. And, it just shows that he's aware of it and has a general understanding of sort of right to repair and maybe a proponent of that. And he is likely, if the House flips, which I think most of us expect will happen, here we'll find out in a couple short weeks, he will likely be the chair of the House Agriculture Committee. And so we certainly want to apprise him of what our message is and what we're doing as an industry. Also, right to repair hearing. The U.S. House Committee on Small Businesses Subcommittee on Underserved Agriculture and Rural Development. That's a mouthful. They had a hearing titled Right to Repair and What It Means for Entrepreneurs. So it wasn't specific to ag. There actually wasn't really focused on any one bill. The chairman of the committee, Jared Golden from Maine, hosted that hearing. Interesting dynamics in that committee because a lot of Democrats actually are not on the committee, whether it's because they resigned from Congress or were reassigned or something. So there's actually more Republicans on that committee than Democrats. Kind of strange. But it was the first hearing of its kind in Congress. And it's sort of the usual what we see in most state legislative hearings. The chairman or whoever has a farmer or someone representing the producers, and it typically tends to be, and it's almost become somewhat of a trope, is you have a organic farmer from wherever that doesn't own a piece of equipment newer than 1975, and it's really has no bearing on what we're talking about today, and what the real issues are at stake. But that tends to be what happens. It's become stereotypical, like I said. The interesting part about that hearing, though, is that unlike the state level, at the federal level, you have people that are, and this is somewhat comforting, that we have our national legislators concerned about the broader impact, looking beyond just the state that they're in, and national security concerns really loomed large in this hearing. It was brought up that there was conviction of a Chinese national for economic espionage. The espionage, as it turns out, was trying to procure source code for ag software and bring that back to China. That happened in the state of Missouri this past summer, and that individual was convicted and sentenced to a multi-year prison term. So it's real for anybody who doesn't believe so. And the other really interesting turn of events was that the chairman himself, who I think is a member of the Armed Services Committee and a Marine veteran as well, he referenced during the hearing the National Security Commission's report on artificial intelligence, and said, I think pretty bluntly, that we don't need to be reducing copyright protections and intellectual property rights. We need to be increasing them, because this is more than just this small issue. We have a much larger national security concern related to this. And so it was almost as if he did a 180 in the committee himself while talking about this. So that was very interesting to note. So all of that, I hope, has given a picture, painted where we've been, where we are, what we're looking at. The cat's out of the bag, as I said. Right to repair is certainly an issue everyone is aware of, or at least tangentially, or has heard of. And so, we can't really, I'm not really that concerned anymore as I once was about raising the flag unnecessarily and drawing attention to this issue. It's there. I think it's become part of the discourse, even outside of our echo chamber. I think that it's sort of broadly known, or, at least heard of. And so, the issue with that is that we as an industry, I think, have largely been defined by others, whether that is the proponents of right to repair, or whether that's even our President Biden coming out with his executive order in which he stated that manufacturers are preventing, or specifically, or purposefully preventing repair, customer repair of equipment, which, as we all know, is not true. But we have, thus far, I think, pushed back on it legislatively, but we haven't made enough of an effort, I think, to try to have our own narrative and not be defined by what other people are doing, because it puts us constantly in a position of explaining. And as I always said in my political campaign life, if you're explaining, you're losing. And so we want to have our own narrative about what we're doing. And that really was the genesis for Repair Done Right, supporting your repair. And I think, Jen, if we want to hop in, we can talk about sort of what that change in the narrative is, how we came up with this idea, and what sort of this survey is all about. And then I can sort of hop in and pepper that. But if you want to hop in there and talk about how we came up with this idea.
Well, Eric was actually the person that came up with the idea for the survey, because he really needed to have data behind him to be able to go to lawmakers and tell a story. So that was the birth of the survey. And he was very strategic about the questions that he asked dealers, because these were questions that were then going to fight, the specific talking points for right to repair. And we'll kind of go over those survey questions here shortly. But the data that we collected from the survey, which we did through Farm Equipment, thank you very much for doing that for us, was the data from there has been put into an infographic that is Eric has been using when he is, at the state capitals, testifying and meeting with lawmakers, that tells the story and in very simple terms of kind of what's going on in our industry. And of course, we have, dealers that are testifying as well. But this is just this one infographic that we put together has really made an impact. And it also then stemmed into us creating some training for dealers that we will go over also, that is going to help us then, smash the narrative as well with kind of the things that we're doing in the industry to commit to supporting customer repair.
Yeah. And, two things happened, Jen, too, as I'm reminded of you saying that. One is that we, in the early days of fighting right to repair at state legislatures, it was all anecdotal and everybody kept saying different things. And, I had legislators saying, give us the codes. We want the codes. They don't even know what the codes are. And then you have people standing up on the floor of the Senate in some states saying, farmers don't have access to manuals. And it was kind of absurd. And, we had to really kind of have some quantitative data to push back on these sort of absurd narratives so we could really narrow down the conversation beyond that stuff, the sort of wild things, and really get to a rational argument about what's happening and what's going on. And then the second part of that is I lost my train of thought there. We'll just jump into the survey. It'll come back to me as we go through it. So top of mind, Jen, why don't you walk us through some of these and tell us about the results?
Well, one of the talking points is that dealerships and manufacturers have a monopoly on repair. But based on this metric alone, with 56% of dealer parts sold out the door and not installed by the dealership, pretty much just kills that narrative that, the dealerships have monopoly on repair and that the customer is forced to do repairs with the dealership. So this is a survey question that came back that we feel that if we had even more dealers participate in the survey, that maybe this number would be even higher potentially.
Yeah, that's right. I think it varies across manufacturer. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the Deere dealers that have testified have said that this is even higher, somewhere near 65 to 70%, even with some dealerships. And that speaks to a lot of different things. One is every dealer will tell you that they're completely busy and just booked and overworked, and they need more technicians. We'll get into that. But that even if they wanted to prevent repair to get more work, they couldn't. They're already, the majority of repairs are being done by an owner or independent repair shop already. And they really don't have any capacity to try to grab even more of that, even though as a business, you look at that and wonder, well, geez, that's a lot of lost revenue that's going out the door, so to speak. But, that still is a number that near 60%, the majority of parts, this is probably the stat that we share the most and draw the most attention to, that convinces legislators and policymakers that there is no monopoly on repair, and certainly not any prevention of owners and independent repair shops performing those repairs. And I bring up independent repair shops for a reason. Jen, maybe you can talk about this one.
Yeah, so piggybacking on the 56% parts out the door, the average dealer has about 2 independent repair shops in their top 10 parts customers. So the independent repair shops are purchasing parts from the dealership to repair, customers' equipment. And they're obviously purchasing a lot of parts because they're part of their top 10 customers. And going even further into that, average dealership selling parts and tools, there's about 9 independent repair shops in total on average that they're selling to. They may not be in the top 10 parts customers, but they have roughly about 9 independent repair shops that they're working with.
And this is a really interesting stat because we hear a lot from proponents that, and even legislators that, and it's come up more and more frequently, that consolidation is a major issue in our industry, and that there's limited choices and there's nowhere to take your machinery. And I thought this stat shed a lot of light on the fact that there may be a dealership in consolidation with the dealers who are, some of the more sophisticated, larger entities with larger investments. But if they're selling to 9 independent repair shops on average, that's a lot. There's a lot of opportunity for repair. There's a lot of competition in the market, and it's a competitive marketplace. It's certainly not a monopoly, and consolidation, I think that's a red herring that proponents use that doesn't take into account how many independent repair shops there are as well. And this is a really good figure for us, and I can explain this, but Jen, why don't you give us the top line?
Well, I feel like these questions all flow together, which is great because it tells a great story that, the dealership is pretty much the place where parts are housed for these independent repair shops. I mean, not only for themselves, but for these repair shops. These repair shops would not be able to source this amount of parts inventory or have parts on time to service these customers that they have without the dealership. This dealership is the one that's carrying the cost of the parts inventory, and they're coming in and buying those parts and fixing customers' pieces of equipment. But it would be much longer downtime for producers if these dealerships didn't have on average $1 million in parts inventory.
Yeah, that's on point. And I actually, every dealer I've talked to, Jen, I think you can chime in here, but every dealer I've talked to, especially in the current supply chain issues, they're increasing their inventory. And also as, parts and service become more predominant in the dealership with less whole goods, people are increasing their inventory. Have you heard the same thing?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think this one, I really like this statistic because here's what I talk about when we get to the nitty gritty of where the rubber meets the road on legislation. There's 2 main provisions, 2 elements of each of the template bill that's ag specific that is really dangerous. And the first is that in order to accomplish some of their goals in this legislation, they want to fix the price of parts so that it is available at dealer net cost to owners and independent repair shops. So basically what they're saying is the dealership cannot charge a markup and make any profit on their parts. Now, I tell people all the time, look, lobbyists come in and will tell you about all these unintended consequences, and that's the big boogeyman out there, but nobody actually tells you what those unintended consequences are. And what I say is, I'm going to tell you exactly what they are. If you tell a dealership in dealerships across this entire country that they cannot charge a markup on parts, that $1 million plus average parts inventory is guaranteed to go down. And all that's going to do are 2 things. One, it's going to disadvantage the farmers because there's a huge cost in carrying $1 million in parts inventory. It's the cost of capital, the cost for personnel to handle it, the systems that you use to keep track of it, everything about it. It's not free. And if you can't recoup your costs, obviously you're going to have parts on hand for your customers, but you're not going to probably have as much because that capital's not working. That's basic economics. So you're gonna lower inventory. But 2 is, what in the world would be the incentive to sell to those independent repair shops who can now supposedly order from the manufacturer or wherever? All you're going to do by fixing the cost of parts is kill the independent repair shops, because their whole model, as Jen said, is piggybacking on the dealership. That's why their shop rates are lower, because they don't have the overhead that a dealership does. And if all of a sudden they have to get parts, they can't have parts Ricky Tick right away from the dealership, and what's that going to do to their business model? It's just going to put them out of business. And so I I think there's a lot of legislators that have had their eyes open on how bad of an idea price fixing is because of all the how much it skews a market that is well established, and has that certain amount of equilibrium that's been created over 100 years of going through that. So a very, very interesting statistic to use. And then next up, we have some stats about technician training and the investment dealers make, and maybe you can walk us through that, Jen.
Well, dealers also invest a ton of money and time in training their technicians. This is something that they have to do throughout the year because of the updates in models, technology, and changes, and just to keep just fresh on all the different types of pieces of equipment that they repair on a day-to-day basis. Or those that they don't repair on a day-to-day basis and have to get brush up on that stuff again. The other thing is spending $100,000 in training per year, and that seems like it's actually a smaller number than what it probably really is on average. And like I said before, if we pulled even more dealers for the survey, I think that number would be even higher. They spend a lot of money in making sure these technicians have the tools they need to repair this equipment. And they also spend a lot of money on trying to recruit new technicians as well.
Yeah, and workforce development has been a huge subject, but I think it also underpins the amount of investment that dealers make into their dealership to serve their customers. And they're not trying to suck that dry. They're constantly putting back into the dealership training and spending on that training that you're not going to see from the independent repair shops. And you're also not going to see on even large farms that may have their own shops. They're not doing that either. And that's why there's always these repairs that eventually end up at the dealership, because they have the knowledge and the technical know-how to do those. And that doesn't come cheap, and it's an investment to serve their customers. And our last two we have on the survey, these are really important because they kind of frame, we've talked about, Jen, a lot of what the dealership does, but yet there's still an issue with uptime for farmers. And we hear a lot of anecdotes about that, and we don't deny that those aren't real. So there is an issue for uptime, but it's not the availability of parts, tools, documentation, or diagnostics. It's not the lack of investment from the dealerships, but there is a culprit out there. And so we kind of wanted to draw attention to that. We talked a lot at length about this, right, Jen?
Yeah, the need for technicians in our industry is astounding. With the average dealer needing 5 additional service technicians like today, and it depends on specific areas too. But definitely that is something that the industry has been working really hard to try and build workforce development for students to become more interested in this field. I know that there's dealerships out there that are investing a lot of time, energy, and money in developing technicians, recruiting, paying for their school. I mean, they're making large investments in this space. And even today, they still are lacking in having enough technicians to serve their customers.
Yeah, and I've even heard of a couple dealerships starting their own schools lately. Just to keep it local and not have kids have to go out of state or go far away, and they can work in the dealership while they're going through it. I mean, dealers are getting very innovative on how they can recruit technicians, and of course the pay is very competitive. And but nonetheless, we have a capacity problem in our industry of not enough technicians to serve all customers at once, especially during those peak critical times of harvest and planting. And so you're going to have disgruntled customers that feel like they're not getting the level of service or immediate attention that they expect. And, dealers are really struggling to do that. And I think that more than anything, out of all the testimony I've heard from farmers, who have uptime issues, it's created not by the lack of their access to those parts and tools and diagnostics And it's because they don't have enough technicians, or it's too far out, the timelines that they have to wait. That is also exacerbated by, supply chain issues and the like. But mainly it's the lack of technicians. And I think every dealer can, that'll resonate with every dealer. Another statistic that seems to exacerbate that lack of technicians is rural broadband. Maybe you can speak to that.
I think you articulate it better than I do, but I mean, rural broadband is also a huge issue for the dealerships, as well as the producers, because a lot of this equipment now has the capability to have remote diagnose a piece of equipment and what's going on. And that lack of connectivity is making it so it is very difficult to use some of those features on the pieces of equipment. I mean, I know that, driving out in some of those rural areas, you have zero cell phone service. So that makes it very difficult for dealers to be able to help a customer out quickly by remoting in and just seeing what the problem is, then having to potentially send out a technician to see what the problem is. And, there are a few other things that services that are available. A lot of people are doing, trying to do kind of video and stuff like that and sending it to the dealership if they can. But, being able to remote in and having a service technician be able to review that very quickly is definitely something that would improve, producers' uptime.
Yeah, I think the number one story I hear that gets repeated over and over, and I don't know if it really happens this much, but is the guy who has to have a technician come out to the farm, and it's an hour drive or whatever, and they plug in the laptop and it's a sensor that costs a couple bucks. And whether that's apocryphal or actually occurs is irregardless, because a lot of that could be done if we had the remote diagnostic capabilities. And so you don't get the $450 bill or whatever it is for the $5 part fix. That's just plug and play. So that sort of rounds out what our survey is, and that informed a lot of what we did. But then we also have a whole other side of this that deals with the manufacturers, what they make available, all of the things that they do. And we wanted to highlight both of that, not only what the association's doing, but also certainly what the manufacturers are providing to meet what we have as an industry commitment to support repair. And that industry commitment is really important because it's voluntary. And we drive this point home with legislators that we are doing this voluntarily. And we would rather have a voluntary market solution than a legislative one. And so we thought we needed to bring some training to really kind of bring all that together. And I think here was my thought earlier, came back to me, is that one of the other things that the reason we created this training was because we've had a lot of dealer demonstrations around the country where we've brought legislators or Farm Bureau or stakeholders of various kinds. We've had these in the U.S. and Canada. And we literally walk people through what is available and show them as a demonstration on a piece of equipment how they can diagnose and troubleshoot problems. And I've had multiple dealers tell me on during those events that this would be fantastic if everyone in their dealership could see this, so that they had a foundational understanding of right to repair and then also everything that's available. And that was also really important because, Jen, as you pointed out, we've had some of those outside groups call our industry and do their own quasi surveys, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they've called dealerships and said, well, do you have this available? And then the dealership says, no, we don't. And then that somehow gets, put into a charter of accounts and is publicized as a survey that we don't make these things available, even though we do. And some dealership personnel may not even be aware of it. So just another reason for our purpose in having the training. And Jen, maybe you can walk us through what the branded training is about and what that looks like.
So we are working with major manufacturers to bring training to dealers. The training involves an overview of right to repair issues, similar to this, but goes maybe a little bit more in depth. But then there's also a training video that is provided to us from the manufacturers that outlines all of the tools, manuals, diagnostic tools, specialty tools, whatever it is that they're providing to their customers. So that can be purchased or can be provided, delivered to the customer through the dealership or through specific portals and things like that the manufacturer has. So this is great for, each one of your employees to know, because when you get those calls that come into the dealership about those things, we want, them to have the correct answers of where to find that information, where to download it, purchase it. So each one of the manufacturers goes, deeply into all the different ways that customers can access that information, purchase things, and you as a dealer want to be able to provide that information to your customer to make them feel like, you are supporting their repair. Currently we have Case New Holland and Case Construction that is available to receive training, and then same with John Deere. We are working as well with AGCO, and then a few others that we have reached out to and are in the preliminary discussions of potentially getting some training put together for them. It's a pretty simple training, but it's also a very important training that we feel is going to help us in the industry and are combating some of that narrative, especially if we have, people calling dealerships and, asking for these tools and manuals and things like that. And, potentially some employees are not aware of that information to provide them. There's also a test at the end to take after you're done, watch the training video. And then we also have some marketing tools, if you want to go to that slide. We also have some marketing tools you can download and print. We have, a poster, social media, a table tent if you wanted to put that on your parts counter. We have the Repair Done Right infographic that Eric actually uses. And there's also a showroom video, and then information on what you would need to put on, suggested information on what would be important to put on your website to help support your customer repair.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll go back to that. We've already had a lot of dealers reach out to us before we kind of put this together and informed us, and we ran this through several dealerships to get their feedback. And one of the big things was that customer self-repair webpage, just has a lot of sort of best practices on what you should include. And you can always reach out to the association to help you walk through that. And we've done that with a lot of dealers. It's just important. It may be a placeholder. It may be a little bit more form over function. Nonetheless, it's pushing back on the fact that we don't have this available, or it's not available in the market. So besides the training initiative and which is fantastic, there's another component to this, and it comes from the training really is the advocacy. So obviously we use the infographic as a handout in state legislatures. It focuses the conversation about what the issue is. But also we have an industry commitment that's voluntary. And when we say that, some legislators are pretty skeptical and want to know that is more than just a superficial commitment. And this is one way that we can show this is if we have the aggregate hours of training from all of the dealers that participate in this. We can say to policymakers, look, we have a voluntary commitment. We've trained people on it, on making sure that they understand what is available to support customer repair. I think that goes a long way in avoiding, some government mandates that come with a lot of other bad policies attached to it. And the other thing is changing the narrative. Like I said, we've been defined by others, but by what they say, when we know that the reality is very different, the repair landscape is very different than what's out there right now. We all know that parts, tools, documentation, and diagnostics are widely available. We know what dealer investment is to support customer repair. And we also know what the real challenges are that are creating downtime. And so we really we have a very positive story here. And when dealers get up in those hearings, I'm always encouraged that we are on the right side of this, that we have the high ground, the moral high ground, so to speak, because of everything that dealers are doing to support their customers and keep them up and running and make us the most productive producers in the world. So, so that's the advocacy side of it. And of course, supporting this and having all of your individual personnel trained and getting the fundamentals of this sort of issue down. When they can talk about it with other people, they're going to be equipped and armed with the facts as well to, spread that gospel. So, we encourage everybody to sign up. Jen, you can probably walk people through this on how that process looks.
So in order for you to get the training, we do have the QR code there. If you wanted to scan it, it'll take you to repairdoneright.info. And there you'll be able to click on whether you're a US or Canadian dealer and purchase the training. There's also just, a little bit more information on the homepage there. Then once you purchase the training, we will contact you with additional instructions on how to provide us with, the set of users that you would like to have trained. And we upload that into the system and away you go. We'll provide all the instructions you need to make sure that the training goes smoothly. But yeah, it's a fairly easy one and done training session for your employees. So it shouldn't be too painstaking for them to take it, but I think it'll be very valuable for your dealership to have your employees take it.
All right. Well, thanks for that. We're going to have information as well on this at our annual conference in a little less than a month, and we can be happy to talk to you guys about it there. And also answer any questions you guys have. I know that I see a couple. And Kim, do you want me to, or do you have a couple there that I can't?
Yeah, I can read some off to you. This one's, I think, pretty quick and easy, I think. Is this going to be available on ThinkZoom?
Oh, this is our online campus platform for those dealers that we have the training for, whether they're John Deere, Case New Holland, or Case Construction, and they're on our online campus. That was something that I was going to be doing for them. It will be a slight additional fee for them to have that on their campus. But yes, that was something that I was considering doing for those that were on the online campus.
Okay, thank you. Then this one is more just a comment more than a question, but many dealers quote or charge a flat rate or standard price to make a specific repair, whereas independent repair shops usually charge a lower hourly rate, but the dealer charging a flat $500 to make a repair is actually less expensive than an independent repair shop charging $100 an hour, but it taking 7 hours. So just a little detail.
Won't disagree with Kelly Matheson. No, and that actually came up in a hearing we just had in North Carolina. There was a question posed about whether you charge by the hourly rate, or is this hourly shop rate reasonable? Again, reaching towards another price fixing scenario, and it came up that one of the dealerships does it by repair, and it's just that exact point was made that yes, sometimes we charge by repair, and the independent repair shop is cheaper. But they may take longer, and sometimes it ends up coming back to the dealership anyways. So, yeah, an interesting point.
All right. And then will the training sign up get a dealer the marketing materials as well? And how do we order a kit for each location?
Yes. So the marketing materials are available for the users that are in the system. So whoever is the marketing person that wants to download those are print ready, that have, the right bleeds and margins and stuff to be able to print those out for your dealership. So yeah, they'll have access. It's under the marketing materials tab in the training.
All right. Do you think that there's any risk of, I don't want to accidentally give the other side any ammo, but with dealerships that are, that are creating their own training and schooling and things like this, that the argument gets made that that's like furthering this service monopoly?
I don't think so, because it doesn't change the pipeline. I think it's all to the good that they're doing as much as they can to serve their customers, and even to the extent of putting in that additional investment, which is outside of their core competency to run a school, but they almost have to. They're being put into that position of necessity. And the fact that they're doing that, I think, is only to the good. And then it really doesn't change the scenario that, most independent repair shops are former dealer technicians. And from everybody I've heard, it's, that's great. Our goal is to keep customers running. It doesn't matter who it is, whether it's a dealership or independent repair shops. And by having their own schools, I don't think it's going to change that. I think you're still going to have people leave that may open up their own shop, and that's all right. They serve a purpose in the market, and obviously there's not enough capacity. There's more work than the market can bear right now. And usually what's interesting about that is that normally, if there's more, it's a basic economic principle that if there's more demand, less supply, costs rise. And I think that one of the interesting things to note is that shop rates haven't gone up even more than if they've even gone up at all. That it's just surprising that they're not even higher than what they are. And I think that that's a commitment of the dealership to, to their customers, to keep them up and running and keep it reasonable, especially when you compare what technicians, the training they have, the amount of tools it costs, the overhead, and you compare that to some other industries for repair, we're pretty cheap.
All right. And then what is the cost for a dealer for the training and marketing package?
So the cost for it is your main location is $400, and each additional location is $150, and that is for US. There's a different set of pricing for Canada. But so if you have, 4 locations, you will have to purchase for all 4 locations. That's kind of how it's set up. We didn't want to do it based on users just because it was just such an influx of different numbers of users. We just do a flat fee of, $400 for your first location and $150 for each additional location. Right. And the marketing tools is a part of that package. It's right there in the system for you to be able to download as soon as you have access.
So right to repair is a topic, I guess we'll call it, it's impacting more than just the farm equipment industry. Is there another sector that is, that is responding to some of these pressures that are doing something exceptionally well, or anything like that dealers can kind of take a cue from and learn from and kind of try to emulate?
Kim, I honestly think that we're leading the way. I think that's why our industry is distinguishable from others, because of the amount of transparency and the availability. We're head and shoulders above every other industry in what's available, and that that's also because we're distinguishable by the fact that we're not really a consumer. It's not a consumer model that, dealerships have partnerships with their customers, long-time generational partnerships. And they're also 2 sophisticated entities. The farmer and the dealership are both sophisticated entities. It's a business-to-business transaction. It's not even really analogous. I mean, it is in some ways, but it's distinguishable even from the auto dealers because their customers are, some may be a fleet deal or something, but most of them are just consumers. In the general sense, they don't have an ongoing relationship. And so I think that we're we're very different in that. And I think that's why we also have found exemptions in a lot of states because of that very reason. And I hope we can continue to convey that with this information and spread that message that we're doing the right thing and we're doing repairs done right. And we don't need right to repair as it is, so to speak.
Okay. And then once an employee successfully takes the test, is there any type of certificate or certification that the dealer can use to promote that within the trade area?
Yes, they should receive a certificate once they've passed the test. Yes.
All right. And then is there, for dealers, is it better for them to be, if they can only put the effort into one area, is it better to put the effort into educating their customer base, their community, or going to, lobby in the Capitol and, on the state level or otherwise?
Well, I'm gonna tell you, Kim, that an old lawyer's term that's a Hobson's choice. That you've narrowed it down for me between two choices that I don't think that's the reality. I think that you can do both. But yes, every dealer is stretched and has constraints on their time. But I think it's equally important to have a message, have a narrative in your dealership and in your community of how much you're doing to help customers, but also to be sharing that same narrative. And I think it's the same way, just educating your customers, the same thing as educating legislators. And that's basically what lobbying is, that it's an education effort. And you should be sharing that same story with them and be engaged, because otherwise, if you don't, I'm fond of saying, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. And we need to share our story and have a seat at that table so that these outside groups don't come in and really lead to some misguided legislation.
Well, that's what Eric's here for as well. I mean, as the National Association, we're here to, lobby on behalf of our members and dealers. And so, Eric, that's what he does on a day-to-day basis is, be the one voice for the industry and, make it so that he educates, the lawmakers and representatives so that they understand the real story, and that he's been doing a pretty good job of that. And I think that us continuing to find ways to educate them with, the survey that we've put together and, training for the dealer network, I think is gonna do great things.
Yeah. And I'll add to that, one dealer's worth 10 of me when it comes to actually conveying what their business model is and how it operates and how they operate their business to a legislator. It's always, and the reason we've been successful, I think, in our advocacy efforts so far is because of dealer engagement. So thank all of you who have been involved in that.
Is there a plan to have repair done right materials available for elected officials or their staff to complete and become educated?
That's an interesting question. I guess we haven't really done that. We certainly share with them the infographic, but it might be valuable for them to walk through it if they're interested in learning more about what is available. It's kind of to your point, it's a mini dealer demonstration. So yeah, that might be a really valuable suggestion. Thanks for whoever that was.
All right, we have time for probably one more question. If anyone had anything for Eric or Jen. All right, well, if there are no other questions, then we will wrap things up. Like I said earlier, the presentation will be available on the farm equipment website in case you want to go back and rewatch it or share it with anyone else at the dealership. Keep an eye on the farm equipment website and email newsletter for more information on that. And then on behalf of Eric and Jen and the NADA team, as well as the entire farm equipment staff, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. There'll be a short survey that pops up once you leave. Please let us know what you thought of the event and if there's any other topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.